Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:15 p.m. Central. You're listening to United Public Radio. Our guest is Aaron Deese, D-E-E, Hunting Grounds Dogmen of the Lakes. And he's running a little late because of some situations, so he should be here hopefully at 45 after. And we got Wham here with us.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
We finished Twin Peaks.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and I've seen the Return, which I may watch those again because it'll probably make more sense now that I've actually seen everything. I've seen Fire Walk with Me, but that's been so long I need to watch that again. But I didn't realize that was a prequel.
Yeah. Well, it's both a prequel and it's sort of, it's because it overlaps with certain parts of the first series. It's both a prequel and sort of a little bit of a coda or epilogue. But if you've watched the first two seasons of Twin Peaks and then watch the movie Fire Walk with Me and then watch the Return again, it'll all make more sense. I mean, in as much as it will make any sense. You know what I mean?
Some of that stuff, like with the Bob, and and the possession stuff, like I couldn't believe that was even on regular TV. Like that.
I know, isn't that wild? Isn't that freaking wild? I mean, when you think about when that was, it was the early 90s. It's pretty intense. It's like, without Twin Peaks, you wouldn't have a whole bunch of other things, like you wouldn't have X-Files and you wouldn't have some of the CSI shows and you wouldn't have just a whole bunch of other things. I mean,
you wouldn't have David Duchovny in drag.
Right. Well, that too. Right.
The Bob was the craziest thing, though. And he didn't even really speak, did he? I mean, a little maybe, but not really.
Well, a little bit. I mean, he had that one "catch you with my death bag" little thing that he said, and there's a whole story about how he even got into the show. I mean, that what I gave you has some like documentaries and stuff in it at the end of it. And I would watch that stuff because that gives you some background information to how, certain aspects of the show, because in the original script, there wasn't a Bob there wasn't a person playing Bob. But there were just a series of weird synchronicities that occurred, which David Lynch decided not only to use, but he interpreted those synchronicities as being evidence that he needed to create the character of Bob more concretely, and that Bob Silva would be playing. Or not Bob Silva, whatever. Frank Silva, that was his name. Frank Silva would be playing Bob. It's interesting because you get an idea of how David Lynch works. There's also I don't think it's available anymore in the United States. I had to import it, but there's. When Fire Walk with Me was made, it was like 45 minutes longer than it is. And the studio made David edit out like 45 minutes of it. Oh. It's almost 50 minutes of it so that it would be the length of a regular movie.
Yeah.
And he did edit stuff out, but some of the stuff he edited out is actually really important because he had to fit, he had to choose like what to do. So he released a special edition, and it was only ever released on Blu-ray. And I actually found a copy of it. Like I said, it's not available in the US anymore. I had to order it from Germany. It's like, you know, in German, it's like in the EU Blu-ray format, but I have a player that'll play any format, you know, and but it actually has you can watch like Fire Walk with Me, and then immediately afterwards you can watch the 45 minutes that were cut out of it, so that if you watch them back to back, you can kind of see where they fit in, because a lot of them are like longer scenes that he just made shorter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it's like even the movie makes a lot more sense. And to me, it's really important because some of the stuff that he had to cut out is stuff that later is alluded to or shows up in the return.
Nice.
So it's like, you know, especially the visuals, especially a lot of the visuals, especially about, you know, because in the first Twin Peaks, you have the Black Lodge, and then you have that weird red room, you know, where denizens of the Black and White Lodge seem to sort of meet in some sort of strange way. And then there are certain things alluded to, like the convenience store and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden in the return, you see some of that stuff. Like you see the convenience store, you see some other places where the Black Lodge might be, but how those connect up isn't clear. Well, that's part of what's in the edited out sections of Fire Walk with Me, is what those links are. So
they're always screwing him over. They did it with Dune like that. His version of Dune, they screwed him over and he had to cut it and all this crap. There's always getting cut somehow by assholes.
Well, yeah, I mean he follows his, you know, imagination and his vision, and, you know, corporate people just they're just about, you know, like, you know, what will fit into a format.
Bunch of douches. We've been watching this Paranormal Caught on Camera show, and I don't think everything's on it real, but they have like some pretty big personalities on there talking about these different clips. And I certainly think some of them are real, but I'm not an idiot. I don't think they all are, but I don't really know. It seems like they vet them pretty good from what I see. But I swear there's this one called on the 7th season called Skinwalker in Arizona. And these kids are out there with a hunting rifle, and somehow they have the scope hooked to a phone so the other kids there can look through it and see what they're seeing. And suddenly, out of the woods comes this like tall albino skinny Uncle Fester thing, and it has long arms and no hair, and they say that they think it's a skinwalker. And but that something about that clip of it. And there was another one that someone got off their security cam, and the thing was like similar to the creepy thing that was on the other video, but it seemed like it was more, I don't want to use the word retarded, but kind of just walking like weird.
Yeah, like, hunched up and weird.
Like it was older, like an older one of those. But anyway, I think they're getting something on camera that's real. They had a good Bigfoot one too, and they have people like Joshua P. Ward, and there's a bunch of people on there that I've never heard of too. But I think it was real, but it was definitely like creepy as hell, whatever it was.
Yeah. There have been several videos. Like I also wonder like how real all of it is, but there have been several videos that they've shown that even if they're not real, they're done so well. If they're hoaxed, they're done so well that they scare the crap out of you.
Some of these are. They're so good. If they're fake, then they're so good. I really think they're real. And there was one Bigfoot video of one that was a Bigfoot in the trees, and he's kind of like doing like this, and then it was a pretty big personality that said it was real, and it was one of the best Bigfoot ones I've ever seen. And it was just like a big full body Bigfoot in the trees, kind of just weird. Like there's some weird stuff on there. But that Skinwalker, if that's what it was the creepiest thing. Like imagine like an albino bald mutated giant with long arms, and it didn't know they were seeing it. It was like it was just, and there was coyotes behind it and two dogs playing up in the corner like in fields, but the coyotes were following it.
Wow.
So, but that's
interesting.
Yeah, that's season 7, episode 3. Then they had one about a dog man outside a zoo that they only got security cameras, and it looked like a full body dog man, which seemed real too. But it's hard to tell. You always have this little skepticism, like I don't believe this shit. Like no, 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 no. But I think a lot of it is real. But there's some that probably flips through that ain't. Like I'm a little hesitant with some of the ghost stuff I see on there. But but anyway, there was one episode where these guys down in Tampa, Florida, went to this cemetery and they were getting stuff, furniture thrown and things. But they had this little app called Necrophone, Necro phone.
Right. Necrophone.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they were picking up like a ghost box.
Yeah,
So,
that makes your phone into a ghost box.
yeah, I bought that thing, and then I also got these things from GhostTube that seem pretty. Like I know there's ones that are full of crap, but there are people swearing under Necrophone and the GhostTube stuff that this stuff really works. But I'm like, does this really work? But we've been doing it. My mom and Christina at different places, and there has been some weird crap. Like they'll repeat energies of things that have been said, like certain words and things like that. But my question is, and I was going to ask Jerry Avalos because he knows a lot about technology, but maybe does that stuff really work? They say it's a magnometer in your phone. It's just hard to tell.
I don't know. I don't know if it works or not, honestly. I mean, I don't know whether it works or not.
Weird, some of the stuff it says that seems peculiar.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it depends on it depends on like what the app really is and what it's doing. Does it have some kind of weird AI in it that that collects stuff, ambient stuff from the atmosphere and then like produces a possible answer from that? I mean, who knows? I don't know.
It seems like they have a database of words that it pulls from, but it seems to keep talking about some magnometer in your phone that can read frequencies or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
They both say that. I don't trust it. But I swear one time it said Jerry to us, and then I was thinking about Jerry Avalos, just asking him about it, and then because he would tell me straight up, no, that's BS. But which I kind of think it is, but it says weird stuff. You're like, maybe it's not. But anyway, later they had an episode on Paranormal Caught on Camera the same day, and it was in the Middle East, and something was messing with a kid and moving stuff around, and I believe that was a real video. But the kid named it Jerry. So it's just weird little things like that.
Wow.
So I know they have those synchronicity apps and stuff. So maybe it's kind of like that, or like a Ouija board, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't trust it, but it does do some weird stuff. But let's see. Rolling Powers, Spirit skinwalkers are known to take many forms and shapes, animals, bears, anything like that. Wolves, so be careful of opening up something that you could possibly get an attachment. I guess referring to the phone stuff. One of the things I want to ask this guy about that's coming on air in Deese is Ron Moorhead said he went out to that land between the lakes, which I guess is near Kentucky and Tennessee, and supposedly a family was really killed out there by what they claim was a dog man. And the sheriff took him there and told him that's what they believe really happened. So I don't know if that's what happened, but there's a lot of buzz about that story from a lot of different places about a whole family being whacked out there by werewolves, which I mean that sounds kind of hard to believe just saying it, but it's kind of weird if the sheriff's taking you there and telling you the same thing. So I don't know much about that place, but I know it's like the dog man hotspot that everybody seems to be talking about, the dog man's lair called Land Between the Lakes or whatever. Well, let's see here. God, been watching some weird cartoons. There's one called Animals on HBO. It's just like these funny animal animations of animals like talking about partying and stuff. It's funny. There's another one like Smiling Friends. That one's really weird. Is that what it's called again? Let me look. Smiling Friends.
Smiling Friends.
Smiling Friends. That's what it's called. And basically it's about like these little cartoon characters that their job is to make other beings happy, and they get into really weird situations that are just like, what the hell is this? like, like some of the animation is bizarre, like just crazy. But that's their job. Someone came in that there was like the Frown Corporation or something that was like they're polar opposites, but their job was to make everyone sad. So they got in like a war with them, just like little small cartoons on HBO. But let me see. I heard a little weird echo thing, but I don't hear it right now. You got to be careful, Wham. If you, I've had this happen. Jay's had it happen. I don't know if that's what's happening right now. It's not really that bad. What I hear, I don't even know what it is. It may not even be from you, but just always make sure on this dumb thing that you check on StreamYard and settings audio that it's on your right microphone, because I kept having it go to my cam, and
Oh,
then it was a weird echo. Like I didn't even know my cam had a microphone.
well, I can tell you this one doesn't, because this is an old computer. I'm going to be getting a new laptop here in the next month or so.
Cool.
So I should have a better camera actually with it.
Yeah.
I'm switching to a Mac.
Nice.
So
And I know
look at my hair. Look at my hair. This is humidity. It's like, it's been.
I hate it. The summer.
Yeah, you don't have any of that right there.
But the big problem, what I meant is I hate the heat here, like the summer. It's here, and I hate it. It's horrible.
We've been having some of yours. It was like 104 in Poughkeepsie yesterday.
Oh,
it was 94 here, and that's really. I mean, fortunately, it doesn't last that long here. It's not like it's all summer. It's like maybe 4 or 5 days. But yeah. Nobody, like most houses around here do not have central air. So, like, we don't have central air in this house. I mean, I have a window unit in my bedroom so that I can sleep. But it's like you're just miserable. And then we had a big storm today, which, cooled stuff off, but it's just as humid. And it made whatever the wind was, we had like a lot of wind, and it blew down two big branches from a tree right by the back door, so that I have to climb over it to get to the chickens. So it's just been, it's just like
this summer worries me.
For God's sake.
Just the way it feels. Like, I know there's always been bugs here, but they seem a million times worse. Like they're freaking waiting out there for me right now on my porch in hidden locations for me to come outside. And I'm not out there for 2 minutes, and I'll be bit like 5 times. It's like they're waiting. And then gnats, I can't even walk without a gnat trying to, like, it's been like that sometimes, but this is every second out there. Like,
I know.
It's like Vietnam outside. Florida. Ugh. But it's already been 100, I know. But all this ecological crap is worrisome. Who knows? The storm part of it is what worries me the most, and hurricanes and all that crap.
Yeah.
I don't need no more Hurricane Michaels. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, I know. I remember.
God.
I remember.
Yeah, it was bad. The weirdest part I remember is just all the military and police on the highways and all that. It was like a apocalypse movie. They were everywhere. But I don't know. Next week's Bigfoot with Rich, and then we take a break on July 5th. Mostly just because it's hard to schedule, and scheduling's so weird lately. Like, we've had almost 4 cancellations. One guy croaked before our show.
I know, isn't that weird?
I know. I can't. I'm sad about it. I didn't even know.
Oh yeah, that's just the wildest thing.
I'm mostly just sad because he was like looking forward to it, and I know he was having heart trouble, I guess, and then it just happened before. And I don't think it was from anxiety from waiting to do the show. It's just one of those things. But no, he's done shows before. I looked him up after him, watched some of his stuff, and it's all near death. So that's the spooky part about it.
Yeah, that's really wild.
and it's just sad too and weird. But hopefully he's a spirit guide, and we'll get another interview sometime on the flip side. but that was Jim Willis, Visible Ink
Yeah.
Press. He has a near-death afterlife book, so if anybody wants to check that out, he knows firsthand, and he knew before. He wrote it because I guess he had similar. I mean, almost happened, and then this time I guess the big enchilada happened.
The big enchilada.
I was sad about so many people have croaked. Like a friend of mine named Zuko Joe, he found out he had the big C, and the next thing you know, whoop, he's gone. Another one, that Richard Lewis comedian. I watched that Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David. He was on there all the time. He croaked, the comedian Richard Lewis. Just been so many. And then I watched that show and saw him on it, and it makes you just sad. He looked rough. I think he already had like cerebral. I don't know what he had, but I think the thing like Michael J. Fox or something. I could be wrong, but he definitely was dealing with something in his old age. You could just tell. But people packing up like flies and heading on out of here on so many levels. I can't even keep up with it. I didn't know David Metcalf passed when you told me that. David Metcalf. I didn't really know him that well, but I had talked to him about that UFO tarot, and he was supposed to get in touch with me, and the Greg Bishop one that I never got, and they probably, who knows, but he was part of that, and that probably didn't help people get him if he was involved and he passed away. So, but I'm not even sure David Metcalf, what kind of stuff was like archaeological or something. I wasn't even sure exactly. I never interviewed before.
Well, he did a lot of different stuff. Let me see he did stuff on cattle mutilations. It's part of what he did.
Okay.
That's kind of how I knew him. Let me see hold on just a second.
There was some Bigfoot lady that passed that I'd interviewed before with brown hair, and she was 40s or 50s, and that was a little while ago. I can't remember her name right now though, but she fought some state in court about Bigfoot and protecting them or something.
Oh yeah.
But that was a weird one.
See what he did. He did several things. He was an editor for something called the Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies, but he did stuff with kind of where the paranormal and science fiction and culture meet, and he had sort of wide-ranging interests, and he and I had several email exchanges. He was interested, for example, he had a specific interest in Lyme disease, but he also had a specific interest in cattle mutilations, and in the stories about, how UFOs and Bigfoot are connected to those. So he had a far wide-ranging kind of approach to stuff. And then there was Paul Eno, who died.
Oh yeah.
And I'm actually writing a blog about kind of reviewing his last full-length book, kind of a retrospective on him, because that was that story of how he got sick is really weird. It's like he published that book that I'm going to be reviewing basically at the same time that I published mine in 2019. I think his was released maybe a couple months before mine. It was at the end of 2019, right before the pandemic. And so neither one of us were able to, and we commiserated about it a little bit. Neither one of us were able to do the traveling and publicity and stuff that we wanted to do for the book, right?
Yes.
Because of the pandemic. But then he started getting sick. He started getting having these weird symptoms, and they finally, it was like a wasting, it was like a neurological, neuropathy, and not neurological, but neuropathy condition, like with his muscles and stuff. And the only thing they were able to, what they finally determined, was that he must have had sort of a version, that what he called it was ALS light. You know what I mean? Like Lou Gehrig's disease light. But he, within a short period of time, he couldn't even like walk up the stairs. He had to like do a GoFundMe so that they could have one of those lifts that lifts you up the stairs.
Yeah.
And then finally at the beginning of this year, in January 2024, they had to announce that he had to suspend his show because he no longer had the strength or the ability to be able to do it. And then he died like within 2 or 3 months after that. So it's like it all happened really fast. It was kind of unexpected. It was very odd.
Was there cases that were weird before it or anything strange?
Well, all he said was, and it could be coincidence or not. I mean, I know what conspiracy wonks will say, but all he said all he knew was that his symptoms started about a month after, or a little bit, like not long after he got his second COVID vaccination. And he never came right out and said that he thought there was a connection. He just noted that. And now other people have, you know what some people will say about that. And, I don't know, maybe he had some kind of endemic condition and something about the vaccination did trigger something. I mean, who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's definitely avoid that word on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I've heard even people, from the left, from people I know that have had stuff with that, like hip stuff and all kinds of stuff. But the guest, I wouldn't rule that out. That's for sure. But our guest is here.
Excellent.
But rest in peace, Paul Eno and Jim Willis and David.
And we did need to do a memorial show.
Yes, most definitely. David Metcalf, so many that have been lost lately. Richard Lewis from Curb Your Enthusiasm. So here we go. Let's get the guest here. How's it going, Aaron?
Hey, guys. How are you?
I'm doing all right, sort of, like everybody else, I guess.
Yeah. my apologies for my tardiness tonight. I sincerely apologize.
It's okay. We completely understand. I was just mostly just so excited. It's a full moon in Capricorn, and we got Dogmen, and people on Facebook were excited. So we're just glad you can make it.
Yeah, and, thank you.
If you need to step away or jet, just let us know. Or there's a little private chat, little icon in StreamYard. Just tell us right there, whatever you're comfortable doing.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Really appreciate your understanding and flexibility. Toddler life, as they say. It's unpredictable, but it's great. It's just unpredictable.
We talked about Twin Peaks weirdness for a while before you got here, so we were all good.
Nice.
But great to have you here. I guess what I'm someone that's been through a lot of experiences myself. Wham has, and I guess what was the catalyst to get you on this subject?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been interested in the unsolved and the paranormal. It's just, as a kid growing up, you'd run into documentaries, unsolved mysteries, sightings, In Search of. So that's just always kind of been a part of the way I've looked at the world. Jump forward to the pandemic, 2019, 2020, and I needed something to do. And I was also dealing with the loss of a couple family members, and I stumbled upon Small Town Monsters documentaries. And, it went from something I was kind of interested in to being like a full-time hobby for me because I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. So then I started a podcast, and I ended up meeting a lot of the folks from Small Town Monsters and worked with Paranormality Magazine for a little bit, and, jumped to today, and it's my job. The Dogman stuff specifically, I had someone who I know very, very well, family member, actually, somebody I trust unequivocally, tell me they had a sighting that pretty much, if you broke it down, point by point as a description, matches the kind of activity that we would hear about the Beast of Bray Road or the Michigan Dogman or some of the Dogman sightings you hear about coming out of, now that I've looked into it, the land between the lakes and Ohio. Roadside sightings of an upright canine form doing something with its front paws that generally you would need hands to do. That's the basic breakdown of it. And when you hear these stories in a documentary or a podcast, or you read about them in a book, they're very, very interesting. But when someone you know and trust looks you dead in the eye and says, yeah, no, this happened to me, that's a whole nother level. That's a whole different thing. At least it was for me. So I became very interested in the topic here in Texas because that's, where the sighting that was relayed to me was from. It turns out we have a massive concentration of sightings in Texas going back over 100 years in some cases, depending on how much stock you put in some of those older folk tales from the hill country. And that led to the coining of the term the Texas Dogman Triangle, which I wrote a book about, and it also became a documentary with Small Town Monsters. And it's just kind of stayed in my periphery ever since then. Folks have come to me unsolicited with their own encounters. We recently went to the land between the lakes and looked into the same topic up there. So it's just kind of become my thing, like it or not. They say that you don't choose the phenomenon chooses you. And I think it's a little bit of that and a little bit of me just really liking monsters.
Yeah, and it's I definitely think they're out there. It's just sometimes it's hard to believe, I guess, on some level. And I'm someone that's seen weird stuff. Like I've seen beams of light. I've seen weird little hooded aliens around a black box. Like I think there's something to it. I've just never seen one. And then I don't know if I want to see one of those necessarily. Me and Christina, my fiance, had one thing that may have been one. But it's kind of one of those, we were going down the road in a car and we saw like this big, weird wolf on the side of the road. This is Florida, and it was just weird, like different. Something about it. It reminded me of like an illustration in a Native American book of a native wearing a wolf fur or something.
Oh, that's like, very interesting. Whereabouts in Florida were you, if you recall?
I'm in Graceville, which is the Panhandle.
Okay.
And I had people tell me there's coyote like wolf hybrids here, but I looked those up. It looked nothing like that. But it may have been something like that. But I'm not. It was one of those. It was so quick, you just didn't. It was weird at the same time. But I guess we had Ron Moorhead on. He said he met with that sheriff guy where that family supposedly had their lives taken in land between the lakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's. I mean, it seems like the sheriff is kind of backing up. That's what happened, right? I mean, is that what they think really happened there?
So, yeah, you're referring to the LBL massacre in air quotes, which is kind of transcended the world of cryptozoology, and it's fallen into the realm of urban legend. And it's one of those things that we can kind of define in this era as being very clickbaity. If you search Land Between the Lakes Massacre on any user-generated content website of your choosing, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, you're going to find a ton of results. That was actually the topic of my latest book, was Dogman activity in the Land Between the Lakes, and with a focus on that incident specifically, but also looking at the broader phenomenon. And there does seem to be a general feeling amongst the locals, researchers who are there, a lot of the people that live there, that something did happen. Now, as to how much truth there is to the idea that 4 people lost their lives and that's why the park was shut down and that's why the Land Between the Lakes is virtually abandoned by the government today, you're going to find as many opinions on that as you can find user-generated videos retelling the story on the internet. So I kind of fall into that same camp. I do believe that something happened to give rise to this story. It could be something as mundane as a family was camping there and one of them was attacked by a chipmunk, and that became a coyote, which became a wolf, which became a bear, which became a werewolf, telephone. Yeah. I can tell you for a fact that this story predates the internet. It was present in the community of Grand Rivers. We can find eyewitness testimonies as early as 1982. And the witness I spoke to who heard the story the earliest recalled hearing it in 1987. So that's before Facebook, before MySpace, before AOL Instant Messenger, before creepypastas or any of that stuff. This story has stuck around in this community. So we do have to ask ourselves why. I'm also of the opinion that the Dogman phenomena is legitimate. I think there's reality to this, and I do think it has a presence in the land between the lakes. So how likely is it that there's not a crossover there? I don't know. That's another thing. I get the writer's privilege of saying, I don't know. I'm just the writer.
I hear a little feedback. Do you hear that, Aaron? Like I swear I heard a woman's voice. I don't know if it's StreamYard, but one thing I ask people to do, if you look at settings on StreamYard, check your audio and just make sure your mic is set, because sometimes it'll switch to like your cam, your microphone in your cam. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to.
But I'm set to my external, and I've got my headphones there.
You're good then. It could just be a StreamYard thing. I'm just trying to. I've had it happen before, so I just ask everybody to do that. But sure. I hear it. It could just be like a StreamYard weird hiccup. For all
I use StreamYard about once a day for my job, and it is a StreamYard thing. Yeah.
I could have sworn I heard a woman talking or something. I think they bleed through like a glitch in the Matrix. Hey, do you know, this is kind of off the cuff. We were talking about this earlier. You know, they have a lot of these apps that are like Necrophone and Ghost Tube that supposedly turn your cell into a device that picks up spirits somehow through the magnometer. That's all BS, right? I mean, have you ever heard of any of that being legit at all?
I've heard of it. I've never heard of it being legit. I'm a big believer in what I like to call optimistic skepticism. Like, I really want all this stuff to be real. I really want to be able to download a ghost detector on my phone, but it's probably not going to work. So you would need, like, in order to verify that stuff worked, you would need some kind of a double blind, where you're conducting paranormal research and doing it alongside tools that have been proven to work in the past. But the problem is that even if you're using quote unquote proven tools, your success rate is still not 1-to-1. So in order to really prove that something like that worked, it would need to be in the hands of the public for a really long time so we could compile a whole lot of data. That hasn't happened yet. But my short answer is I think it's nonsense, and it's there to generate ad revenue.
It has like a word bank that pulls from it, because it sounds kind of AI-ish, but they try to say there's a magnometer that picks up. I've had some weird things happen playing with it, but I'm like, this is still BS, even though that's a little weird.
Yeah. You can make a decent amount of money, I understand, if you just get a couple million people to download an app. So,
exactly. What were you going to say, Wham?
No, nothing. Nothing.
But
I was agreeing.
Okay. Well, one thing, I'm in Florida. It sucks. I'm ready for fall, winter to be here again. Luckily, I'm in the Panhandle, but it's like this torture. Like the mosquitoes and gnats are just waiting for me, Uncle Fester, Chubby Nosferatu to come outside to drain me. They love it for some reason. They're waiting, like on my porch.
Brevard County is my hometown, so I feel you. I'm right there with you.
Where's that at?
Brevard County, Cocoa Beach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Georgia, but I've lived down here so long I've lost count of the years in the Panhandle, Panama City Beach. But the weather, luckily, it gets 20s and 30s in the fall. I mean, winter and stuff. So thank God for that. We're near the border, Georgia and Alabama border. But okay, well, when it comes to these dogmen and werewolf, from everything you've researched, what the hell are they? I mean, what are they? Mabus' soldiers that are going to rise with Loki and the Sasquatch Titans? What are they?
That's the $1 million question, brother. Yeah, that varies very strongly depending on who you ask. There are a lot of people in the Dogman community, which is growing all the time. It's bigger than I think a lot of people realize, and it's growing very rapidly. But there are a lot of folks in the community who are of the opinion that we are dealing with a cryptid. And I mean that in the sense of an unclassified biological animal, a species or an offshoot that has not been identified and acknowledged by science. And I think you can very convincingly, I think you can see there's one that every time I start talking about this on any show, there's a dog every time. So, but I think you can very convincingly make that argument. And that has to do with the data points we have regarding sightings, where they take place, generally national parks, ranches, campgrounds, wooded areas. Roadside sightings are very common, but they generally occur next to wooded areas. They're near food sources, whitetail deer, small game, sometimes a lot of fishing sources. I don't know if dogmen fish, but there's a lot of protein available to them. They also cross over very often with Sasquatch reports. And I think the general consensus amongst many people is that Sasquatch is probably a biological animal. That's a whole nother conversation that we could have another day. But when people look at these maps and go, okay, we have Dogman reports here, Sasquatch reports here, they're within a few miles of each other, makes sense that they would be sharing some kind of a biological territory existing within this biological system somewhere. So you can make that case very convincingly. The problem comes with a lot of these reports, and I would say maybe 50-50, where they very strongly venture into the spiritual spectral realm. We start looking at things like, witnesses having overbearing feelings of fear and anxiety, sometimes before they even see these things. Sometimes they do actually do what appears to be changing shape, where they'll move from a four-legged position to a two-legged one. We do have the odd off report where they're described as looking half man and half beast. I have my own opinions on those, but there are a lot of Dogman reports that are so strange. They venture so far into the supernatural realm. It's very difficult to just nail them down and say, okay, this is just an unclassified animal. Sasquatch reports, we have a lot of that as well. And I make that comparison because that's an easy comparison that a lot of people make. Sasquatch reports, we see the same kind of thing where we have reports that are very spectral or seem to go beyond the veil, as it were. But even if it's, a 50-50 split with Sasquatch, which I don't believe it is, Dogman is overwhelmingly stranger. And the other thing with the Dogman encounters is they're almost 99% of the time described as being frightening. The creatures are described as aggressive, unfriendly, it's sometimes seeming to stalk or follow people. So there's a very specific profile to them, and it straddles the line of like cryptozoological animal and spectral horror from beyond the veil of reality, whatever that means.
What is Tiamat's Wolfmen? I see that because I know Tiamat's like in the Necronomicon and weird stuff, those Simon paperbacks and stuff. And I know it's part of what is it, Mesopotamia or Babylonian, or I know that Marduk and Tiamat and all that, those creepy little Simon Peter Levinda supposedly paperbacks.
Yeah, that's specifically what we're talking about in reference to the book. There's a section on ancient wolfmen and incarnations of the upright canine in the ancient world. And Tiamat was one of the principal gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon, who was thought of as being malevolent, unkind, and she was defeated by a lesser god, Marduk. It really kind of mirrors the story of the Greek gods, Kronos and Zeus, in the Greek pantheon. It's very close. Not the same, but there are some parallels there. And Tiamat, who is this great dragon goddess thing, had this army of monsters she created to fight Marduk. And one of them was Erudimu, the gruesome hound, sometimes referred to as the mad canine, which are such cool names. I was so happy I got to put those in the book. Right, so cool.
Mad canine, that is so great.
Right, like you want to write that down on something, and I did.
Yeah, that is cool. That is very cool.
Right, yeah. When I found that, I was like, I'm putting this in there. And some scholars have looked at depictions of Erudimu and said this looks like a half human, half canine. Some have said it looks more like a half human, half lion. I would argue that in either case, we could be talking about something that fits in this category of, this chimeric being that represents both humanity and something wild. But what we see here is the presence of the upright canine motif going back as far as ancient Mesopotamia, literally the cradle of civilization. So these things have been with us in one form or another for a very, very, very long time.
And I saw the Dogman Triangle documentary. It's really good, and I try to watch every small town monsters that I can get my hands on.
Thank you.
And basically, what was the story? And I can't remember. I think this was, I don't know if this was in Dogman Triangle or one of their others. I think it was in Louisiana, something about a native curse and something happened with wolves, werewolf type creatures, and some kind of Native American situation. Does that ring a bell with anything?
So that pops up a lot. There are a couple stories you could be referring to in the Dogman Triangle, because we have a few stories down here in Texas that are, they say that this was a Native American legend, and the later European settlers found out about it, and that's how it became this campfire story. Yeah, it could be the Beast of Bear Creek. That's one that comes up in there a lot. The Plum Creek monster comes up in that conjecture a lot, as well as oh goodness, I'm forgetting. There's one west of San Antonio. I've got the book over here somewhere, but we do have a couple stories like that that kind of fall into that. The Cleo Wolfman, sorry, the Bear King of Marble Falls. So there's three. Two of them have bears. That's why I always get confused. But
Like, I know Ron Moore had brought up some weird story about a UFO and people saw bear people get out of it. I just saw that in my head when he said that.
They could be aliens. I don't know. There's conjecture that, I mean, we joke, but there's conjecture that they could be aliens. I haven't reviewed any credible reports that lead me to that conclusion, but that's just my opinion. But the problem that I've run into is when we get into this is a Native American legend, when you start digging a little deeper and you go, okay, what tribe did this originate from? Who of Native American descent is telling this story that can verify, yes, this does come from somewhere in my cultural background? Very often that's not present. But what we do have are these stories that have stuck around the hill country, in Texas at least, for 100 years or more. Some of them go back to the end of the 1800s. So could they be Native American legends that found their way into the communities that were established later? Absolutely. Totally possible. We just don't know for sure.
So I know I've seen lately on like a paranormal caught on camera, and I know all that stuff. I don't think it's all real, but there's definitely some stuff you're like, well, if that's not real, they could do horror movies. Like there was one skinwalker in Arizona where it showed like some kids on a hunting scope, and they had it going through their cell so the other kids could see it. But this thing crossed in the woods, followed by coyotes, and then there was dogs playing up in the corner. But it was like this big, white, pale, albino-looking weird thing with long arms, and it was the weirdest thing. Like it haunted me after seeing it. And I think that video, I don't know, but it seemed like there was some legitness to some of that stuff on there. But when it comes to the skinwalker, are they something entirely different, or some of them Dogman shaped from your research, or is that just two separate things completely?
That's another really good question. It takes me back to the upright canine motif being present in so many cultures and so many places in history, because we do see it in the Native American tradition in some tribes. My hesitancy comes from saying, well, dogmen are skinwalkers, and that's what people have been seeing this whole time. They're the same thing. I don't have the cultural knowledge of Native American beliefs to say definitively one way or the other. We can definitely point to tangential and physical similarities, this idea of an upright walking canine again. And then again, like I said, there's kind of just putting this together. Sorry. There is a pervasive sense in a lot of these Dogman encounters that the witness has run into something evil or something that is not good, whether it's magical or organic. It's something bad. It leaves people with a sense of unease, of being afraid. People have nightmares. They display what looks like post-traumatic stress disorder. And I say that as someone who doesn't, know anything professionally about psychology, but they're left with very lingering after effects. The skinwalker in many traditions is described as being an unpleasant being, a person who has taken on this ability to change shape through dire and unspeakable means very often. I think I'm quoting my own book at this point. But so that we do see those parallels both in these modern encounters and in the stories that we do have that come from some of these Native American traditions. But again, I think the problem comes when people from outside, like me, say, oh, well, this is all the same thing. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. That's just the process I go through. I try to take it one step at a time and go maybe. But then on the flip side of the coin there's a gentleman named Nick who's involved with research with the North American Dogman Project down here in Texas, out of Medina. He's of Apache descent, and he said, actually, you saw him in the documentary. He said, yeah, my grandfather talked about these things. We've known about these things existing around here for a long time. So, we can say yes, but then I'm always like, but let's take that extra step and double check, because,
From what I've seen from the shows, which I know a lot of those are full of crap, but it seems like the skinwalker seems to be like some weird golem looking thing more than a dogman or whatever. But I've seen different interpretations of it. So
yeah.
But when it comes to dogman and these encounters, are they always aggressive and terrifying, or is there ever any positive ones? Because it seems like they definitely try to paint that brush.
Yeah, I can't think of a single one that is positive. You know, you hear Bigfoot stories to make that comparison again. Let's do a different monster. You hear about Loch Ness monster encounters where people see this thing and like, oh my God, my eyes are open. The world is beautiful. You know, nature is miraculous. Things are so much more wonderful than I ever could have imagined. That does not happen with Dogman. We do see some reports where people just they kind of have a neutral reaction to it, like, oh, I saw something really weird and I didn't really want to get closer to it. I wonder what that was about. But we don't see people walking away from these going, wow, amazing. I hope I get to see one again. I hope everyone gets to experience this. You know, if people have a response afterward, it generally is, I would have been fine not seeing that thing. I would have been fine not having this encounter. So, you know, I don't know why that is. It probably depends on what they are. But the short answer is no. I can't think of a single Dogman encounter where someone came away going, wow, that was great.
And then you wonder if the missing 411 stuff is the Dogman eating people, like a lot of those cases. I've heard rogue Bigfoot stories, but, you know, it seems like a lot of those are positive most of the time. But definitely... I know on the front of the book you have is it coming out of a portal? Is there any cases that there is some kind of activity like that?
So that's a funny story because my good buddy Jonathan Dodd did the cover for this book and for my first one, the Dogman Triangle. You can't really see it. It's behind me here. And all I told him was I would like a werewolf in profile and something that looks like lakes or rivers because it's about the land between the lakes. And he came up with that totally on his own. And the book does explore some of the themes of like, what if these things are from beyond the veil of reality? Let's look at what we know about folklore and ghosts and mythology and see how it lines up with the land between the lakes. Because that is some of the conjecture we see from some of the witnesses, like Mr. Martin Groves. You know, perhaps these things come from portals to another place. He's very careful to say maybe, perhaps. I don't want to speak for his opinion, you know. Excuse me. But Jonathan just came up with that totally off the cuff. So that it became like, oh yeah, figuratively, this plays into what's in the book. But that wasn't my idea. That was my boy Jonathan. Yeah.
And Chasing the Massacre, that section, I'm trying to remember. I read it when I first got it, but my memory's horrible. Is that the Land of the Lakes Massacre? And it says there's a survivor? Or is that a different case? Was there a survivor to that?
That is the one that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. There is a gentleman who has come forward within the last few years, I want to say 2-3 years ago, who claims to be a witness to and a survivor of that event. Opinions vary very extremely powerfully as to how true his story is, as with anybody, you know, any paranormal story, that's going to be a thing. You know, I try not to have opinions, especially when it comes to living witnesses who are right in front of me, because it's, you know, then you have to work to separate the person from the story. And that's difficult for me. I've spoken with him a number of times. I've gone over his testimony and verified what parts I could. But the short answer is yes, there is someone who purports to be a survivor of that event. Mm-hmm.
And I know the sheriff and the law enforcement that they back that up, because I know Ron was saying something about like they brought him out there and stuff. They had the police like stand behind that story.
There are not any law enforcement I'm aware of who will vouch for that individual's testimony. People other than me with greater resources than me have attempted to verify it and have not been able to prove or disprove it. It's one of those kind of situations. Yeah.
Has any of this research brought anything knocking on your door at all, or any experiences?
No, that's a great question. No, I haven't had a sighting. I haven't had any run-ins. I've had some brushes with what could be considered the paranormal at earlier times in my life. It definitely opened my eyes to the fact that the world is much stranger than we realize, but not anything connected to this stuff. I'm to a point that I hope I don't have a sighting as much as I would kind of like to, because if I do, nobody's going to believe me. You know, I write books about
it. And take it from me, who's been studying this for a long time. They never happen exactly when you want them to or when you expect them, and they're much scarier in real life than theoretically.
Yeah. That seems to be the consensus, especially with this phenomenon. Again, people don't come away from it feeling good about themselves, and I'm fortunate to be a part of a community and have several colleagues who I could go to and who I know would take my story at face value, despite the fact that I have a financial interest in people buying books about this stuff. Let's just be frank. It's 2024. We're all adults. But as like, I don't know if I would come forward publicly or ever write about it, because I don't think people would believe me. I don't know if I'd believe me.
And
yeah,
definitely. And has it always been Dogman for you, or is there anything else that's said, maybe I'm going to do that one day or tackle that one?
Yeah, the Mothman is kind of my first love with this stuff. Like with a lot of people, the Mothman Prophecies was actually the first book I ever purchased with my own money. I think I was 14 years old. I was mowing lawns for cash, and I bought that at Books A Million. So I just aged myself. But Mothman has been done. It's been done very well and very extensively. Small Town Monsters has done a few films that are Mothman centric, and they're some of my favorites. So there's not anything that I personally could add to that. UFOs, I've been into since the jump. I think, like a lot of us, we actually have a series running right now, UFOs Revisited, over on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel that I'm a co-director and host on. So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of where my focus is outside of the Dogman stuff right now, is the UFO world. But
and Small Town Monsters, I've been with them since they first started, and I've had other people on. Was it Bruce Hallenbach, right? Wham, the
yes,
Kinderfeld monster. That was
Kinderhook Creature. Yeah, that was the first or second Small Town Monsters publishing release. I don't remember. It was either the first or second, but yeah.
I always remember the Blob story. There's like some people saw Blob.
The Blob is great. I love the Blob story.
Somebody else saw the Virgin Mary. Another person saw a Blob. It's like what message that's in your mind, feeding off of your beliefs.
Great.
But and Bruce also is a Hammer horror aficionado expert, so that's always nice. I need to get him back for that for sure.
Yeah, fun stuff happening in the Hammer world, man. The what's the new Universal Park? I just had it and I forgot it. Dark Universe. That's going to be cool.
Yeah, was that there was some weird Eddie Izzard Jekyll and Hyde that may have been from Hammer. I'd have to double check that, but there's been a few movies I know. The worst thing is those Nika figures, which I can't afford, so I'm not even going to try. But stuff. But they had some movie also, like was based on that Swedish dude's let the right one out or let the right one in or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's supposed to be good.
Yeah, I've had some horror. I have all their old stuff, and I also try to keep up with werewolf stuff. I just saw that Larry Fessenden Blackout. It was pretty good, but weird. That was a weird one that just came out. That's got good reviews. That Larry Fessenden guy. It's called Blackout.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, it just came out, and now there's a big echo. I swear StreamYard's like glitching in the Matrix. But another one, did you ever see Late Phases? That was a good one.
No, I haven't seen that one.
You got to see that. It's Late Phases, and there's some kind of little subtitle with it, but it's about this, it's from Dark Sky, but it's about this older vet guy that retires in an old folks community, and the old folks community has a werewolf problem that gets out of hand. So definitely.
Oh, yeah. I got a growing list of werewolf movies to watch. I hadn't seen that many when I wrote my first book on it, and I kind of did that on purpose because I was like, I should watch all the werewolf movies. And I was like, wait, let's do this first and then see what happens. And then I went back and watched a few of those films that people were like, oh, you hadn't seen this one yet? And I was like really surprised in the ways that cryptozoological research synced up with the fictitious realm without me already having that stuff in my head. It was kind of an experiment, still ongoing, I guess.
But yeah, Blackout and Late Phases, that's two newer ones. If you need to add them to your list, they're worth it. They're good.
I just did.
Hey guys, keep talking. Hold on for a second. I gotta give a pet update to my partner. So hold on, I'll be right back.
Wham has chicken problems. I have dog pig problems.
All in there together,
dog,
man.
Cat, pig. Well, the main reason we do the show is a long time ago. I went through testicular cancer at 17 and went through all that crap. It was horrible, chemo and stuff. Then several years later, my dad passed away. And then a lot of weird things started happening to where I saw beings of light leave my house as if they'd been inside. That was in Florida here on Silver Lake. And something told me to go outside and look. And this was like, God, I lose count of the years, 10 or 15 years ago. I went outside and turned towards my house. And it was like two people made of light had been in my home, and they flew through the roof straight into the heavens. And I was completely sober, not even tobacco or weed, nothing. And that time, of course, I've seen stuff partying too, but that time completely sober. And I guess maybe they were deceased loved ones. I've heard everything from angels to deceased loved ones to aliens to Anunnaki to Syrians, but I don't know what the hell they were, but I'll never forget it. A lot of UFO stuff where it seems like it's there over your home with multiple witnesses. And I don't know if I've been taken, but you're like, maybe I have, and I just don't know. But there's been weird stuff like that. And we've been doing it for about 16 years. And I've interviewed Stanton Friedman, Jim Mars, like a bunch of legends who have now passed away. And now it's like year 17. I'm like, oh, we're still trucking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great to have you here. And this subject, I don't know if we've ever had anybody on just about Dogman. I mean, I know we're talking about different stuff, but that's their area, of complete expertise.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't think of myself as an expert. I'm an enthusiast who spent a whole lot of time on one topic.
Is Dogman your spirit animal?
Maybe at this point, maybe. Yeah, we jokingly. I was writing my first book while we were waiting for my son to be born. Like that was a whole fun thing. It was great. And so we would joke like, oh, he's going to be the werewolf prince when he's born. Well, then he was born on Halloween. So, maybe. Be
careful what you say.
Right. You never know.
But what are some of the cases that we haven't spoke about? What's one that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah. Oh, there's a few, man. We could Russian roulette this one and they'll all come up. Full, empty? What's good in Russian roulette? I guess empty. There's a really compelling story out of Gregton, Texas, which is northwest-ish. I'm in San Antonio, and it's definitely northwest of me. About this woman who was in her home alone at night. Her husband was out of town away on business, and she saw in her window this upright canine thing staring in at her. And it's a very descriptive story that she tells. She talks about how there was a storm rolling in and it was facing out towards the countryside, and very interesting story. And that's one of the stranger ones where she actually describes it as seeming to have the body of a man but a shaggy wolf's head. So really, really interesting stuff. But that story for me, what's so cool about it is that it was kind of lost to time for a little bit, sort of. There were a couple of blogs that mentioned it online, but they didn't have a full breakdown of it. And the source for it was an old issue of Fate magazine. So I spent probably 3 weeks while I was writing the Dogman Triangle trying to track down this story to its original source so I could get all the details and hopefully include it in the book. And I was able to find a back issue of Fate magazine on eBay, ordered it, took like 2 weeks to get here, found the story. It's this little footnote. It's 3 paragraphs maybe, kind of wedged into like a letters to the editor section. But we found it. Here it is. Great. Well, then Heather Mosier over at Small Town Monsters, who's my editor, was able to get a hold of the people at Fate Magazine who still own the rights to this old issue, and we were able to get permission to include it in the book. So that's a cool story in and of itself, that this lady saw this thing and she felt so frightened by it. Basically had a Dogman encounter in the 50s before anybody was talking about this stuff. But the process of tracking down that story and then being able to replicate it and put it out there so more people could get it, that was a fun thing to do kind of in the background.
Definitely. And I know I've seen on some of those shows like the Woods one, whatever it's called, like someone took something from a cemetery, and one of those dogmen showed up at their house, and then they took it back and it vanished. Is there a lot of stories where it seems like they're kind of like keepers of the dead or cemeteries and things like that?
There are quite a few anecdotal encounters that involve them showing up near cemeteries. Yeah, that's definitely a recurring pattern. And we see that in Texas, and we also see that in the land between the lakes. I've heard conjecture about that happening also in Michigan and in Ohio. Those are two areas I've kind of recently pointed my telescope towards. So I can't point to any specific cases there, but that is definitely a recurring thing that we hear about. I can't think of any stories that involve them following anyone home, or a physical attachment to an object, except for one out of Paradise, Texas, which is also kind of in the upper corner of the Texas Dogman Triangle. That was first recorded by Nick Redfern, who I'm sure many people watching or listening to this have heard of. But this farmer was experiencing cattle mutilation on his property, and after a couple days of this, saw this two-legged wolf, upright, walking across the field, and it seemed to kind of vanish into thin air. He went to the spot where it had vanished, and he found this little stone tablet with this gargoyle, wolfish, monster-like face carved into it. Nick had that stone at one time. It's no longer in his possession. I don't know where it is, but he does have pictures of it, and he very graciously allowed me to include it in the Texas Dogman Triangle. So, you have these stories like that. There's also the story of the Hexham Heads, which comes out of England circa the 70s, if I remember correctly. I talked a little bit about that in the book as well, and it's covered by my buddy Eric St. Laurent in very, very good detail over on the Man Wolf Files. But that was a story about these kids that found these two little stone heads digging in their backyard one day, and then a werewolf showed up. So that's the short version, but we do have stories like that, just not a ton of them. I think you're muted, my dude.
There we go. Sorry.
Happens to me every time.
Yeah. And because I was trying to block out dogs, but when I forget, I'm trying to block out dogs. But what about the goblins? I see that in one of your chapters. Is that the famous goblin case, or is that something different?
Oh, the Kentucky Goblins case. Yeah.
Oh, it's that one. Okay.
Yeah, I did a profile on that for the book. It really doesn't have anything to do with Dogmen, but a lot of folks, I think, don't realize, I didn't realize until I was doing research for this book, that Hopkinsville is 27 miles from the land between the lakes. It's very, very close. So if you look at Google Maps and just zoom out a little bit, those county lines disappear. It's right by the land between the lakes. For all intents and purposes, you could say it is the land between the lakes. I realize that it's not, but if we're not thinking about man-made geographical boundaries, that's not very far at all. 30 miles is not very far. So it struck me that there's all this concentrated strangeness in the LBL. Dogman sightings, yes, but UFOs, ghosts, mysterious disappearances, Bigfoot, water monsters, other cryptids, the whole gamut. And then right nearby, you have this very famous case from the 50s that kind of set a template for us in terms of UFO contactee cases. So that's why that's included in there. And then also the Thomas Mantell UFO crash, which Small Town Monsters is producing a documentary on right now, that happened in the same general vicinity. And based on the reports from Mantell, and when this object he was chasing was spotted, he was moving in the direction of the land between the lakes. Not saying the UFO was going that way, but it is still the same vicinity. So it's interesting. It's interesting. You could speculate that there's some kind of vortex or something, but I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, and I've kept up with a lot of the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, and I know there's been big wolf sightings there and things like that. And as far as Dogman, the crazy thing about those Skinwalker Ranch shows to me is just how many government spooks are on those shows. Like there's so many. That's the part that's more creepy than the paranormal phenomenon. Like there's Bigelow personnel. There's just Colonel John Alexander. There's former CIA analysts. It's like they're having a meeting on that show and doing
that's wild. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. And Katie Page, who's appeared numerous times on that show, is on our UFOs Revisited panel. So
yeah.
Shout out to Katie.
I definitely think there's phenomenon happening there, but when you see that many government personnel there, it puts up a red flag or something.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Like we know something strange is going on there. We know there's an interest in it from people with a lot more money than you and I. So yeah.
And then, of course, I'm sure Bigelow drained it of whatever was cool there and took it a long time ago.
That's why he sold it. He was like, okay, figured it out, guys. Not going to tell anybody.
We found the onion. but yeah, I like the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch show a little better. That's what's weird. All those other ranches they're going to, there's similar stuff that's happening. That's pretty weird. I like that one a little better, but that's creepy too. Why ranches is what I'm trying to understand. Like, why are they centered around so many different ranches? Like, what is it? Maybe it's because there's bases there underground in the country. I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of two ways to look at that. It's the same with the Dogman stuff. Why are these sightings occurring in national parks and on ranches? Is it because the environment lends itself to that kind of activity? And because it's a land that somebody owns, they happen to be out there at some point, they witness it? Or is it something about that place that generates or attracts this stuff or lifts the veil or whatever you like? I feel like I'm using that phrase a lot, but it's yeah.
And they have that Chris Bledsoe episode where he summons UFOs, and there's like 2 CIA dudes and Colonel John Alexander and like an X-Men apparatus while he's summoning phenomenon on that one of those shows. I don't know why the feedback's getting worse. I'm just going to blame StreamYard, but it seems to be doing it every show lately, so it must be one of their weird issues. Like they probably have a million shows going at one time and it just like bleeds over.
They've got that echo cancellation, but it doesn't always work, I've noticed. Yeah.
A lot of times it's good because you can listen to the show and then you don't even hear it. Like here's some reduced microphone background noise. I'll try that. Maybe that'll help. But so what's next? Is there a trilogy with this like George Lucas? Or
That's funny because when we were filming Dogman Territory, which is the companion to the book, that comes out very soon. It'll be in July. I joked that this is our Empire Strikes Back, guys. Let's do it, because this was a follow-up to the Dogman Triangle. So I would very much like to continue writing on this topic. I found a lot of threads while I was writing this book, Hunting Grounds, that very much warrant further investigation and very easily could have been expanded into multiple chapters. And I found I had to stop at a certain point because I was getting away from the Land Between the Lakes, and that was ultimately the focus, So I'm gathering notes, I'm gathering interviewees for my own edification, if nothing else, but I do hope to write on it some more. It needs some more time. The Dogman community is developing and growing. We are now entering an era where any piece of video or photo evidence has to be treated with the utmost scrutiny because of all the, AI generators that are out there now. We're already seeing AI Dogman videos since my book came out, like in the last 60 days. So, that is ongoing. And for me, that's a part of the exploration is how the community reacts to this, what hoaxes look like, how we respond to them, how hoaxes generate more conjecture. And then also I want to look more at the folklore and the history and how ancient people looked at this stuff in a little more detail. So I want to take some time before trying to do another book, but I hope not to be done with it yet. Yeah.
what is I'm looking through my notes I made. The Rakshasa, the Raksasa. Is that the weird tiger creature from Dungeons and Dragons? No, that's something else.
So that name does come up. Same with Arudamu that we talked about a little while ago. Those names are used very often in pop culture. Arudamu is in Dungeons and Dragons. I think the Rakshasa, that name is used in there as well.
It's like a tiger dude.
Yeah. It's described in the Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baring Gould, which comes from 1865, as being, his words are, the Hindu equivalent of the werewolf. And then he lists off a few things that parallel werewolf legends with Rakshasa legends. Sabine Baring Gould was a white Christian writing in the 1800s in, I believe, France at the time. So that was his perspective, I think if we're going to look at this stuff through a modern lens, kind of going back to the Native American thing, we've got to be careful about drawing equivocations, especially when it comes to other religious backgrounds and other cultural things. But that's one of those things. I'm glad you mentioned that. I would really like to consult with people who know more about Hindu mythology, who can look at these two legends and say, here are the places where they do line up. These are the places where they don't, here's how much validity there is to this idea. So, but yeah, it plays to kind of the overbearing Dogman theme that this idea is represented all over the place. Even if it's not called a werewolf over here, there are still going to be some parallels, shape-shifting, predatory behavior towards humans, canine appearances, things like that.
Has anyone ever said these things that the Dogman has tried to communicate with them? Like, You get a lot of Bigfoot, weird, telepathic Bigfoot and stuff like that. Has any cases come up where there's been any kind of communication?
There are a couple, yeah, and that's taken us back to the category of these stories that are very strange and seem to fall outside of cryptozoology. We have stories where witnesses report that they experienced what we would equate to mind speak, or if they didn't get direct sentences or words transmitted to them, to put it simply, it was an impression or a feeling of intent of I'm in control of the situation and you're not. I can cite Mr. Martin Groves, who I interviewed extensively for the book and who also appears in the documentary. He had a very vivid, striking experience where he felt that this thing was trying to communicate some kind of intent to him. And he had this very distinct impression in his mind that this was a dangerous situation. So, yeah, we do see that.
Because, they seem to have the stereotype that they're the ones eating everybody. And it was on Bigfoot, but now it seems to have gone to Dogman.
Yeah, and in some ways, people latch onto that. This stuff runs on sensationalism a little bit, and I love it. That's part of the reason I love it. It is so much fun, and it's a lot of fun to talk about a narrative in which Bigfoot is the good guy and Dogman is the bad guy. We have eyewitness testimony that might indicate that would seem to correlate that idea, but there's a whole, like you said, that's kind of the story now, is that Dogman's eating everybody. It very much has taken on a life of its own. Yeah.
Was Dogman Triangle the one where it had a guy that was like anonymous and said he like urinated himself for seeing them or something, or was that a different one?
That may have been American Werewolves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had one anonymous witness in Dogman Triangle, and that was actually the story I talked about earlier, the personal acquaintance or family member, really, who relayed their story to me. He speaks under an anonymous name, and it's over the phone in that movie, but that's the actual guy. So, but I believe all the other eyewitnesses in Dogman Triangle were on camera. Yeah.
And in Dogman Triangle, there was a farmer or something that would see a lot of them all the time in this area. That's pretty weird, like a pack of them.
That was Mr. James Witter, and that was the Plum Creek Monster, which that blew up in headlines back in the 80s. As being responsible for cattle mutilations. There were stories that people were seeing these things and they were finding dead cattle, and it became the beast of Plum Creek. Plum Creek is right between Austin and San Antonio, and it's still kind of rural. It's growing now. There's about 40,000 people now, but back in the day, it was a very, very small community, pretty much just some cattle ranches, and that's it. And James Witter, the gentleman you saw in the film, he witnessed these things multiple times, and he stayed away from doing interviews. He didn't want to be on camera. He didn't like the way the newspapers had taken this thing and run with it and had whipped everybody into a frenzy. Oh, the Plum Creek Monster is going to get you. But Heather Mosier, the grade A researcher of all time, was able to locate Mr. Witter, get in touch with him, and get him to agree to an on-camera interview. So, yeah, that testimony that you saw there, that was about 40 years in the making, getting that story on camera. Yeah.
It's definitely fascinating just to think about. I don't know. I guess I lean more towards like weird parallel realities or something. I know Ron did really good with Quantum Bigfoot and kind of conquering some of the woo-woo with science, with real science in your face. Like that was his newest book, Bigfoot Unveiled, and it has David doing the foreword to it and everything. And I lean towards paranormal, I guess. But I'm trying to stay open, mostly because I've seen weird shit before. So it's not hard to roll this out when you've seen it. When you've seen stuff that's like, what the hell is that?
And it really does, in a lot of cases, seem to come down to perception as to how these stories are being told. If you speak with someone like you who has seen things that defy casual explanation, is a term I like to use, versus someone who has an interest in Bigfoot but studies it purely from a zoological standpoint, has no open perception to the idea of anything beyond it's an animal, I think that has a lot to do as well with how these stories are told and how the witness perceives them, kind of their perception. So I don't mean to trivialize what you said, but it's a really good point that like people view these things differently based on their experiences,
And Wham, has Dogman come up there in Hudson Valley any ever with Gail or anything?
Yeah, there have been some sightings or some reports, I guess, is probably more correct. Not very many, but, it's still mostly Bigfoot if you see cryptids. But there have been a few I know that Gail believes it. I don't know what I think about it. I mean, I am somewhat familiar with indigenous stories, as you know, Jeffrey, and there are indigenous stories that do reference various types of dog beings. Although I have also talked to a couple of my indigenous teachers here who have opined that they believe that Dogman or those kinds of sightings, those kinds of beings, actually represent a kind of energy or being that white people brought over. That's kind of what they have said. Not that there aren't potentially negative beings that they occasionally will talk about here, but
no, you said Jen once. That was pretty nice.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of something I've thought about a lot. I've done a lot of research on the Jinn, sort of like Rosemary Guiley did, but actually more in-depth research than she's done, because she was coming at it from as a complete outsider into that culture, and I have more ties to those cultures than she did, and more inside information. And the only thing that I will say is that if you look at the traditional sources regarding Jinn, that not only go back to some of the civilizations, the ancient civilizations that you were talking about earlier, but those traditions that have been maintained in North Africa and the Middle East, going kind of in a swath, through parts of even into India, what you find is that there is not a single cryptid that has been described, classic cryptid that has been described in the West that does not have an analog in descriptions of the Jinn. It's almost one-to-one. If you look at the different categories of the Jinn, there are a number of different nations of the Jinn that are mentioned in the traditional literatures, and the most common ways that they manifest are as half animal, half human. That's a very common way that they manifest. They manifest in ways that are intended to confuse human beings about whether they are ghosts or not, or whether they are your ancestors or not, or whether they are demons or not. And so it's almost in the traditional stories, they exist, and because of their nature, and also because of the ways in which various of them, not all of them, but various of them choose to interact with human beings, they almost, the ones that don't like humans, because there are some that do like humans, the ones that don't like humans appear to want to go out of their way to confuse us about who they really are and what's really going on. So I mean, it's a complicated thing to talk about, but for example, the fact that dogmen or some of these cryptids may telepathically give messages to some people, or people sort of have these weird experiences of seeing them kind of appear and disappear. We talk about them being cloaked or whatever. Those are all characteristics that are specifically attributed to Jinn. And I mean, and these stories go back thousands of years. So, what's important is that the Jinn are understood to be a category of being. And so that anything like this that happens, say in Arabia, they just like chalk it up to that. Like if you have cryptids, they just, because that's considered, I mean, in Western terms, we would say that is what they term paranormal. Well, then that is jinn, and that's sort of their blanket way of understanding all kinds of things like this. Mm-hmm. And human beings can make deals with them sometimes. Some human beings decide that they are going to hang out with them. They will abduct certain human beings from time to time, because the reality they live in is right next to us. It's not even interdimensional. I mean, we talk about interdimensional only because our sensory apparatus is very limited, so we don't see what's right next to us. But it's not even like in another realm. It's this realm. It's just that they can see us and we can't see them. And that is what makes them scary. That's what makes all that stuff scary. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it easy for any of it to fool us, because if something just appears to us, or it's out of our frame, we tend to attribute it to all kinds of magical things. And all it is the ability to just sort of appear or not, which if you think about frequencies, if you think about, what we can pick up of light, what we can pick up of sound. I mean, most animals in the world can hear and see things that we don't. Mm-hmm. Their sensory apparatus is attuned to, my chickens can see 100 more shades of color than I can. Mm-hmm. And we don't consider that extraordinary. You know what I mean? So, to me, I guess what what my conclusion is that whatever this is it's been with us as long as we've been here, or maybe longer. It interacts with us in such a way that, we can make up stuff about it. We can even fool each other about it. We're going to make up stories about crap we don't understand. There's, of course, going to be cultural implications and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, no matter what we explain, there's always a certain percentage of things that we can't explain. Mm-hmm. And that's where that lives. Yeah. And it's probably interacting with us all the time. We just don't think about it very much, I
always think of the Coyote Hairy Man folklore. Coyote and Hairy Man hanging out from native folklore.
Well, I just think of Artie Six Killer Clark like constantly, in all of this, Yeah.
She has some great ones. Are you familiar with her at all, Aaron? Artie Six Killer Clark. She is native, and she has a book, Native Star People Encounters, and
she has like 4 or 5 books actually.
Like tribal people and got their stories. They're really good.
Her stories that she collected from Central America are astonishing. They're really amazing.
Sky people.
It's like one of the best books of that. And because she's indigenous, people would talk to her about stuff where they wouldn't talk to a white person at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just amazing. The stories are amazing. And by the way, I meant to tell you, Jeffrey, you were talking about bears and UFOs. I'm reading a book called The Woman Who Married the Bear, and it's a collection of bear goddess stories from indigenous America and from Eurasia, by Barbara Alice Mann, and then a woman who is an expert in Eurasian Arctic mythological systems. I mean, this is a scholarly book. It was published by Oxford University Press, and so it's not like a woo-woo book, right? But
what is it called again? I'm trying to
find the Woman Who Married the Bear.
Okay.
And it's expensive. It's like $99. So, I mean, it's like a scholarly book. But she does recount some stories of bears coming out of, in the indigenous stories, they're not called spaceships, obviously. coming from the stars, because bear is associated with, that asterism, Ursa Major. So we call the Big Dipper, or a part of the Big Dipper. And that what's interesting about that asterism is that asterism was a bear both in North America and in Eurasia, which points to something really, really old, probably predating the last ice age at least. And so there's these two scholars, talking about the similarity in stories, but really old stories that involve the marriage of bears and humans and the advent of giants, because both, there are these weird stories, indigenous stories about the stone giants, the cannibal giants, that are sometimes connected to some of the mounds, the mound complexes that sort of interface with bear stories in ways that are really confusing. So and then those overlap into Bigfoot stories. So she's kind of going through all these stories to see kind of like what the layers are. It's really it's actually quite interesting. And Barbara Alice Mann she's a Seneca lore keeper, so she is connected intimately. She's not only a historian, but she's connected intimately to her clan and to the Haudenosaunee. So she knows what she's talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I saved it for sure. I'll check it out. Of course, we've heard about the meme lately of chicks wanting to marry bears over dudes. So that's also strange.
Well, what's interesting is that's not a new thing. That's not a new thing.
That's weird, but
it has a really strange link. Remember, I was telling you about Paul Eno. Paul Eno in his last two books, he has Paul Eno. By the way, are you familiar with Paul Eno at all, Aaron?
I've heard the name.
Well, Paul Eno was a really excellent, amazing paranormal investigator who came at all of this stuff from a very interesting standpoint, whether you agree with him or not. But he recently died about 2 months ago, kind of suddenly and unexpectedly.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, I heard him in the news.
Right.
Trying to remember.
But he has a series of stories that he has, a series of experiences, because he not only investigated things, but he also has some kind of, he had sort of an intuitive ability where he would pick up, where he believed that he picked up information from different entities that would be passing through an area. And he specialized in helping people unhaunt their houses, or get rid of poltergeists without exorcisms, which is interesting, the way that he approached it all. And apparently had a fair success rate. But he talks about how he's encountered several entities over the course of his life that were bear spirits, Ursuline, as he called them, bear spirits. And it came to be his belief, because I had some private conversations with him, that whatever bear is here, whatever bears are, that they are connected to some kind of a spirit that has decided for its own reason to sojourn on Earth and interact with humans in certain ways. And it manifests in bear species, and then it will, and according to him, it will go away at some point. It's just kind of interesting. It's like, how very strange.
Yeah.
Bearman might be the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, to me, it has implications for, like, indigenous stories about different kinds of animal spirits and what they might be and represent, and
King Arthur was the bear.
Yeah, well, that's what his name means, is the bear.
Well, definitely interesting. And then the Ron Moorhead weird bear UFO thing was weird.
Right, exactly, right. So So don't rule out bears. Bears may have some, because bears are connected in like both indigenous traditions in at least North America, and in Eurasian shamanic traditions, especially around the Baltic Sea area, like in the Ural region in Siberia, all connected to the stars. They come from the stars. So it's I just find that interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means exactly, but it's just interesting. In other words, the bear spirit is not from here.
Yeah, and it crosses over, like you said, into a lot of paranormal lore and folklore and history. Like we have, like we were saying earlier, 2 potentially werewolf-centric stories down here in Texas alone: the Bear King of Marble Falls and the Beast of Bear Creek, that talk about what could be a dogman-like creature, but some versions of the story also say, well, no, it was a half man, half bear, not a half man, half bear.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. It's pervasive.
Yeah. So, it's, I mean, I'm trying to, what's interesting to me about indigenous stories is they're very much like Hinduism, in the sense that, if you're familiar with Hindu mythology, you don't have one story about everything. You have like multiple stories that kind of interweave together around certain themes.
Yeah.
But and they're sort of layered. So there's not a lot of, I mean, sometimes in culture there's some privileging of certain versions of the stories, but then people who actually study them will actually, pull other stuff out. And that's the way indigenous stories are. It's not like the Bible where you get like, well, we think there's one origin story. If you actually know Hebrew, you know that there's actually 4 creation stories in the Old Testament. And there's at least 2 in Genesis, but then there's a couple of others in other places. But, where you have like one narrative that has become like the narrative. And that's just not the way indigenous stories work.
Yeah. There's not one story about Kali. There's not one story about Vishnu. Like there are different interpretations and systems of worship built around different entities. We tend to do this one-to-one thing in Western civilization, and that's just not how it usually goes.
It's just not how it is at all.
We got about 4 minutes. Real quick, what was the story, Aaron, about the sheriff that took like stories about Wolfman sightings and put them in a box? Was that Brave Creek or Brave Road or something else?
Yeah, so that's if we're talking about hunting grounds, that is Mr. Martin Groves. Yeah, he had an encounter with one of these things in the land between the lakes in 1993. It's either 1990 or 1993, and for some reason I keep switching those years in my head. I have sisters that were born on both of those years. That's probably why. But he ran into one of these things and had heard stories about them before, but kind of wrote it off. But after having his own encounter, he said, no, I'm going to take this seriously. And as these reports started to arrive on his desk, people would come into his office or call them in. He wrote them down. His original notes, he still has those. Jesse and Joe Doyle over at Hellbent Holler have studied them. And the majority of what he recorded has gone into his books. A Trace of Death, The Beast of the Rivers, and I believe Beast Between the Rivers. Look up Martin Groves on Amazon. I'm probably getting the book names wrong, but that is the most comprehensive overview, detailed overview of actual Dogman activity in that area. It is, a case book. It is very empirically reported. He presents it without a bunch of extra embellishment. It's a dream to any researcher, anybody who's interested in this stuff, which kind of made my job when I was writing my book easier because I didn't have to do a case book. That had already been done, So, yeah, Martin's a great guy. Good dude.
I just added those and I'll check them out. It definitely sounds good. I love your books. I have both of them. I love the documentary. I love Small Town Monsters. I love it.
We appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it so much. Was there a link you want to get out? Just Small Town Monsters, or do you have any other links?
Yeah, smalltownmonsters.com is the best place to keep an eye on what we're doing. We're on all the social media channels, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or whatever it's called these days, Facebook. I run our social media, so best place to reach me is over there. Aaron at smalltownmonsters.com if you want to shoot me an email, want to share a story about Dogman, or just say hi. Don't be a stranger.
Well, we appreciate it so much. Great show. Thank you. And we'll got to stay in the loop on your next book. And thanks so much, Aaron. It's been a great show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
watch out for that Capricorn full moon. You got Pan, Saturn, werewolves, and all kinds
You
of
know, Capricorn is my favorite sign. I'm not one, but it's my favorite sign. So
I'm one, and it's uncomfortable sometimes.
that's Capricorn is what I want to be. So,
and then all the tarot people are like that. You're sated. They're the devil. Like, thanks. Good to know. Feels like it sometimes. But everybody have a good weekend. Thanks so much, Aaron. Thanks, Wham. Thanks, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. Have a great weekend, everybody. Good night.
good night.